After smoking a delicious brisket, you are left with a beautiful barbecue masterpiece, but you're also left with a bunch of scraps and trimmings. So if you're like me and you don't have a sausage maker, or if you just want to try something new with your trimmings, I'm going to show you how to make something incredible with these scraps. Here I have the leftover trimmings that I've collected over the last few brisket videos. And if you didn't know, you can actually freeze your trimmings for up to 6 months. That way you can stockpile them up and then do whatever you want with them once you have them in bulk. So the trimmings consist of two things, fat and meat. Now in regard to the fat, you've probably already heard about this from Jeremy Yoder or a bunch of other YouTubers, but you can actually melt down the fat from the trimmings and make beef tallow. So I like to cut down the fat trimmings into small chunks so it's easier to melt down, and then just stick them in a foil pan and into the oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you can also stick your trimmings into your smoker, and that way you get like a smoked beef tallow, but usually when I'm doing this, I'm cooking and I tend to forget about the trimmings, and then what ends up happening is the little beef chicharrones in there get all like burnt, and then the tallow gets over smoked. And once the tallow is melted, strain it and put it in a jar. And this liquid gold can be used for all sorts of things. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you've seen me on many occasions use this tallow to basically wrap my briskets once they're done. And I know a bunch of other YouTubers do exactly the same thing, but you can get really creative, and I've seen a lot of creativity on YouTube with the beef tallow. For instance, Dave from Wilson's BBQ has a southern fried chicken where he actually deep fries his chicken with beef tallow. Also, Brad from Chud's BBQ has a recipe video where he makes tortillas with the beef tallow. And I'll have a link to both Dave and Brad's videos in the description box. But for my first recipe, I'm gonna show you how I make Hasselback potatoes with this beef tallow. So I love this recipe because it's super easy and it's super cheap. All you need is a big russet potato, the beef tallow we just made, and then whatever seasoning you want to put on the potato. Take your potato and cut a slice off the bottom so that it can sit flat on the cutting board without rolling around. Then put 2 chopsticks on the sides of the potato and make thin slices all the way through the potato. The chopsticks will act as bumpers so you don't accidentally cut all the way through the potato. Then place the potato on a baking sheet and place the slice of potato you cut earlier under the sliced potato. This will help the slices we just made in the potato to fan out. That way we can get all of the tallow and seasoning on and inside of the potato. Now, if you're making these in bulk, you can just take your potatoes, you can get a big melted bowl of tallow and then dip them in, and that'll be a lot easier, but since I'm only doing one, I'm gonna go ahead and just pour it over. Air fry the potato at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 to 45 minutes, and if you don't have an air fryer, you can also put it in your oven for the same amount of time, but at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And as easy as that, the Hasselback potato is done. Now, I wish I could take credit for this recipe, but I actually got it from kevinscooking.com. Now, he doesn't use beef tallow or barbecue rub on his potatoes, so if you want to see his exact recipe, I will have it linked in the description box. Crispy on the ends, it's soft at the bottom. It's like a beef tallow barbecue chip. Like I said before, along with this recipe I just shared, there are so many applications that you can use with this beef tallow, but I want to move on and talk about the meat of the trimmings. So I have done this a few times on this channel, but for those of you who don't know, whenever you trim a brisket, you usually end up with a big piece of meat from the flat side of the brisket. And I call this piece the Brisket Jr. So the Brisket Jr is exactly what it sounds like. It's a cutie little baby brisket. So I like to take this flat trimming and season it and put it on the smoker along with whatever I'm cooking. And I treat the Brisket Jr just like I would treat any other brisket. So I let it hit the stall, I wrap it, and then I wait until it gets tender at about a 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit internal, and then at that point I rest it. And you can save up a bunch of these Brisket Juniors and you can cook them up like country style ribs, and they make a great meal on their own. Yee boy. Wow. So I showed you how to use the fat from the trimmings, I showed you how to use the meat, and now I'm gonna show you how to use both to make delicious Mongolian barbecue. I currently live in Middle Tennessee, but for the majority of my life, I lived in Southern California. And in Cali, they had these incredible Mongolian barbecue places, and I just miss them so much. For 10 bucks, you could get all you can eat stir-fry meat, noodles, vegetables, and sides. Now there are a few places here in Tennessee like Bonfire, but it just doesn't taste the same. And on top of that, it's way more expensive and I have not found a single all-you-can-eat spot. So for this recipe, I'm gonna do a copycat of California-style Mongolian barbecue. And the first thing I'm gonna do is get this meat prepared. So I'm going to use a knife to cut the meat as thin as I can, as if I'm making beef jerky. And as a side note, you can also make beef jerky with these trimmings if you're not a fan of Mongolian barbecue. I also like to wait until I've done a few briskets before I do Mongolian barbecue, because I can cut down the meat and then save as much as I want in the freezer, and then I can have Mongolian barbecue anytime I want. But anyways, I'd recommend cutting the meat when it's frozen, unlike I did, because it'll just make things way easier. So I like to put the meat in its own bowl and then add some soy sauce, teriyaki, oyster sauce, and vinegar along with a tablespoon of that beef tallow we just rendered down. And while that's marinating on the counter, we can make the other components of the stir fry. For the rest of the components of the stir fry, just put in whatever you like. I'm doing chopped bell pepper, broccoli, and shredded carrots. I usually like to do some chopped tofu too, but I just forgot to buy some at the store. I also boiled water for noodles and got that prepped really quick so I can add them in once I'm stir frying. And now that all the components are prepped, I am ready to cook. So I got out my carbon steel wok and greased it up with some more beef tallow. Then I added some garlic to the pan to brown it a bit before adding in the meat and marinade, cooking that until most of the pieces are brown. Then I put in the vegetables and then the noodles, making sure to keep the food moving with tongs so nothing burns. You can also put in whatever add-ins you like here. I put in some MSG, some honey for sweetness, cornstarch to thicken up the sauce, and a little more oyster and teriyaki. Another thing, before you add in your noodles, I would highly recommend adding in some beef tallow or some other fat to the noodles so that they don't stick to the wok like mine did. That's all there is to it. Delicious Mongolian barbecue right in your very own home. Look at that. Delicious. All right, let's give it a try. Really good. One thing I would do differently in the future is that I would freeze the meat before I slice it. That way I can use like a mandolin or vegetable peeler to get really thin slices. And don't get me wrong, the way I cut it, it still tastes really good. It just doesn't remind me of the California style because the meat in those all-you-can-eat places is just so thin and it kind of like curls up. Didn't get that effect with this, but again, still really good. So good, I'm gonna get another plate. As delicious as all three of these recipes looked, you can't really make them until you smoke a brisket. So for an in-depth beginner-friendly guide on how I smoke brisket, make sure to watch the video on your screen right now.